I never imagined that buying my childhood home would lead me to uncover a decade-long fraud, but that's exactly what happened when I found the previous owner's letters. It all started with a snowstorm and a woman who had turned our quiet neighborhood into her personal fiefdom, a woman whose obsession with rules would ultimately become the instrument of her own spectacular downfall. For me, it was never about fighting, it was about being left alone to live a quiet life and help my neighbors. But some people, you learn, cannot stand to see a nail that isn't hammered down, and I, apparently, was that nail. I own a small landscaping and property maintenance business. In the summer, it's lawns and gardens, in the winter, it's snow and ice. It's hard work, but it's honest, and it pays the bills. 2 years ago, I finally saved enough to buy the house I grew up in. My parents had sold it a decade prior when they retired and moved south, but seeing the for sale sign go up on that familiar lawn felt like a sign from the universe. It was a bit dated, but the bones were good, and the memories were even better. The neighborhood, Northwood Estates, was just as I remembered it, a collection of modest single-family homes, mature trees, and neighbors who mostly kept to themselves but would always offer a wave or a helping hand. The homeowners association had always been a sleepy, almost non-existent entity. They collected a small annual fee to cover the maintenance of the little green space at the neighborhood entrance and organized the yearly block party. It was benign, a formality more than a governing body. That all changed about a year before I moved back, with the arrival of a woman named Karen Miller. She bought the corner house, the one with the immaculate, chemical green lawn, and within 6 months, she had somehow maneuvered her way into becoming the president of the HOA board. The changes started small, almost imperceptibly. First came the newsletter, a glossy, professionally printed affair that replaced the old photocopied sheet. It was filled with new community standards. Mailboxes had to be a specific model and color. Holiday decorations could only be displayed within a very specific 2-week window. Garbage cans could not be visible from the street except on collection day itself. They were annoying, sure, but most people, myself included, just shrugged and complied. It was easier than making a fuss. We were a community of people who worked hard and just wanted to come home to peace and quiet, not a neighborhood war over the acceptable shade of beige for your window trim. Karen's power grew with the community's apathy. The board, which had once been a rotating cast of volunteer neighbors, was now stacked with her handpicked lieutenants, a couple of retirees with too much time on their hands and a sycophantic newcomer who seemed to hang on her every word. The monthly newsletters became thicker, filled with increasingly arcane rules and passive-aggressive reminders. She would walk the neighborhood with a clipboard, making notes. A small oil stain on a driveway would earn you a warning. A child's bicycle left on the lawn overnight would result in a citation. She was a petty tyrant in the making, and we were all letting it happen. My first direct run-in with her authority was minor, almost laughable. I had replaced the old, faded house numbers with new, modern ones. They were clean, clear, and perfectly legible. 2 days later, a crisp envelope was taped to my front door. It was a formal violation notice. Per Northwood Estates Community Bylaw 7, Section 4A, it read, all residential numbering must be rendered in a serif font, specifically Times New Roman or Garamond, with a height of no less than 4 inches and no more than 5. I remember staring at the letter, then at my sleek, sans serif numbers, and just laughing. But I changed them. It was a $20 fix, and I had bigger things to worry about, like running my business. The trigger for our war, the event that turned my quiet annoyance into resolute opposition, arrived in the form of 2 feet of heavy, wet snow. A nor'easter blew through and buried the entire state. For me, a big storm meant big business. I was up before the first flake settled, getting my plow truck and salter ready. My crews and I worked for 36 hours straight, clearing commercial lots, apartment complexes, and the private clients on my route. It was exhausting but profitable. When I finally got home, bone-tired and smelling of diesel, Northwood Estates was a mess. The municipal plows had done a single pass, leaving a mountain of icy snow at the end of every driveway. Many of my neighbors were elderly. I'd known some of them my entire life. Mrs. Gable, 3 houses down, was in her 80s and lived alone. Her driveway was an impassable wall of ice and snow. So, despite my exhaustion, I fired up the small plow on my personal pickup truck. It was quieter than the big commercial rig and less likely to tear up the asphalt. I cleared my own driveway first, then I went down the street and did Mrs. Gable's. Then I did the walkers across the street, because I knew he had a bad back. Then I did a few more. It took another hour, but it was the right thing to do. It was what neighbors did. I didn't ask for a dime. The next morning, as I was sipping a much-needed cup of coffee and looking out at the clean, safe driveways on my block, there was a sharp, insistent pounding on my front door. Not a knock. A pounding. I opened it to find Karen Miller standing on my porch, bundled in a pristine white parka, her face a mask of pinched fury. She had her clipboard. Of course, she had her clipboard. "Good morning, Mr. Johnson," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "I see you've been busy a morning, Karen," I replied, leaning against the door frame. "Just digging out." "It was a big 1 inch indeed," she said, her eyes narrowing. "It has come to my attention that you have been operating a commercial snow removal business within the boundaries of Northwood Estates without proper authorization." I blinked. I wasn't operating a business. I was helping my neighbors. I didn't charge anyone. She gave a tight, unpleasant smile. "The distinction is irrelevant. You used commercial-grade equipment." She gestured vaguely at my pickup truck, which was no different from half the trucks in the neighborhood, to perform a service. Bylaw 12, Section 8, expressly forbids the operation of unregistered commercial enterprises within the community. This includes the use of personal vehicles for commercial purposes. I felt a slow burn of anger start in my chest, but I kept my voice even. "Karen, it's a pickup truck with a plow on it. I cleared a few driveways for elderly people. That's all, and in doing so, you violated the bylaws," she snapped, her composure cracking. "Furthermore, you pushed the snow from the driveways onto the designated snow storage easements along the curb, exceeding the allowable height limit specified in the Winter Maintenance Addendum, page 4, paragraph 2. This was absurdity on a whole new level. Where else was I supposed to put it? Back in the sky?" Her face hardened into a granite slab of indignation. "That is not my concern. The rules are the rules. They exist to maintain the aesthetic standards and safety of our community." She made a checkmark on her clipboard with a flourish. "You will receive a formal citation in the mail. A fine of $100 for the first offense. A second offense will be $500. A third will result in a lien being placed against your property." She turned to leave, her boots crunching on the salted walkway. "You're fining me for helping an old woman." I called after her, my voice louder than I intended. She paused and looked back over her shoulder, her expression one of utter disdain. "I am fining you for breaking the rules. No one is above the rules, Mr. Johnson," and with that, she marched off, a self-righteous soldier of suburbia. I stood in the doorway, the cold air rushing in, feeling a mix of disbelief and pure, unadulterated rage. The line had been crossed. This was no longer about beige mailboxes or font types. This was about decency. The citation arrived 3 days later, as promised. It was printed on heavy cardstock with the Northwood Estates HOA logo embossed at the top. It looked more official than my tax returns. The violation was listed in cold, bureaucratic language: unauthorized commercial activity and improper snow disposal, a $100 fine, payable within 30 days. I crumpled it up and threw it in the trash. I was not paying it. A week later, the mail carrier couldn't get down our street. The municipal plows hadn't been back, and the narrow residential road was a rutted, icy mess. The common areas, including the mail kiosk at the end of the block, were buried. According to the HOA charter, the association was responsible for contracting a service to clear those common areas. Clearly, they hadn't. I saw Mrs. Gable trying to navigate the treacherous ice to get to her mailbox, and my blood boiled. Karen was so obsessed with me piling snow 2 inches too high on the curb that she had completely neglected her actual duties. I called the number for the HOA management company listed on the newsletter. A bored-sounding receptionist informed me that all communications had to go through the board president. So, I sent Karen an email. I kept it professional. I pointed out that the mail kiosk was inaccessible and that the roads were becoming unsafe, and I asked when the contracted snow service would be coming. Her reply came within the hour. The board is aware of the situation and is handling it in accordance with our budgetary constraints and vendor availability. Your continued focus on the board's responsibilities is noted. Perhaps you should focus more on your own compliance with community bylaws. The sheer, unmitigated gall of it was breathtaking. She was deflecting, blaming, and threatening all in one go. The next day, I received a second citation in the mail. This one was for $500. The violation? Failure to remit payment for citation number 1. It also included a note, handwritten at the bottom, "This is your second warning." The next step is a lien. That's when I knew this wasn't just about a power trip anymore. This was a vendetta. She was targeting me. And placing a lien on my house was a serious threat. It could affect my credit, my mortgage, everything. My quiet frustration had now blossomed into full-blown strategic resolve. I was no longer just going to ignore her. I was going to fight her. But I was a landscaper, not a lawyer. I knew I was out of my depth. I decided to seek professional counsel. I looked up local lawyers who specialized in real estate and HOA disputes. I found a man named Arthur Davies, an older gentleman with a small, unassuming office downtown. He looked less like a shark and more like a kindly grandfather, which was exactly what I needed. I sat in his cluttered office, the air smelling of old books and coffee, and laid out the whole story, from the house numbers to the snowstorm to the threat of the lien. I showed him the citations and the email exchange. He listened patiently, peering at the documents over his reading glasses. When I was finished, he leaned back in his creaky leather chair and steepled his fingers. "Well, Mr. Johnson," he said, his voice calm and measured, "you've got yourself a classic case of what I like to call petty tyrant syndrome. It's remarkably common in these associations. An individual with a desperate need for control finds a small pond and declares themselves a king. Can she actually do this?" I asked. "Can she just find me into oblivion for helping a neighbor?" "Can she?" "Yes. The bylaws of most HOAs grant the board broad powers." "Should she?" "No. Her application of these rules is clearly arbitrary and capricious. It's punitive, not corrective," he explained. "We could fight this in court, but it would be a long and expensive process. She would use the HOA's money to fight you, while you would be paying out of your own pocket. It's a war of attrition she's counting on winning." My heart sank. "So what do I do?" Mr. Davies smiled faintly. "We don't fight her on her terms. We fight her on ours. The weakness of every petty tyrant is that they believe their own press. They believe their power is absolute. But it's not. It's derived from the very rules they hide behind. We need to find a rule she's breaking." A big 1 inch. He leaned forward. "I need you to get me a copy of the full HOA covenants, the budget for the last 5 years, and the minutes from all the board meetings." "How do I do that?" "You're a homeowner. You have a right to them. Send a formal, written request. She'll likely try to stonewall you, but the law is on your side. We'll give her a deadline, and if she misses it, we'll have cause for legal action," he instructed. "In the meantime, document everything. Every interaction, every email, every new ridiculous notice she tapes to your door. And whatever you do, do not pay those fines. Paying them is an admission of guilt." I left his office feeling £100 lighter. I had a plan. I wasn't just a frustrated homeowner anymore, I was an investigator. That evening, I drafted a formal request for the documents, citing the relevant state statutes Mr. Davies had given me, and sent it to Karen and the rest of the board via certified mail. The first shot had been fired. While I waited for her response, I started digging. The house was still a work in progress, with boxes from my parents' move-out still tucked away in the attic and basement. I'd been meaning to clear them out for months. One rainy Saturday, I decided to tackle the attic. It was dusty and filled with forgotten treasures and junk. In the far corner, under a canvas top, was an old wooden footlocker. I didn't recognize it. It must have belonged to the family who owned the house between my parents and me. I pried it open. Inside were stacks of photo albums, some old clothes, and a large manila envelope simply labeled HOA. My curiosity piqued. I pulled it out and sat down on the dusty floorboards. Inside was a collection of letters, newsletters, and documents dating back about 8 years. They were all from the previous owner, a Mr. Peterson, addressed to the Northwood Estates HOA board. The first few letters were standard homeowner complaints about a neighbor's dog or a broken sprinkler head. But then they took a different tone. One letter, dated 7 years ago, caught my eye. To the board, it began, "I am writing once again to inquire about the status of the community amenities for which we are all paying a quarterly special assessment. The promised swimming pool, tennis courts, and clubhouse have yet to materialize, yet the assessment of $200 per quarter continues to be collected. When can we expect construction to begin?" I sat up straight. A swimming pool? Tennis courts? A clubhouse? I had lived here as a kid and had just moved back. There were no such things in Northwood Estates. There never had been. I kept reading. There was another letter from 6 months later, more forceful in its tone. Then another, a year after that, practically begging for an answer. With each letter, Mr. Peterson's frustration grew. The replies from the HOA, a few of which were stapled to his originals, were masterpieces of bureaucratic evasion. "The board is currently reviewing bids from contractors. We have encountered unforeseen zoning delays. The project is temporarily on hold pending a revised engineering study." My hands were trembling slightly as I sifted through the rest of the papers. There it was, a copy of the HOA budget from 8 years ago. And clear as day, a line item, Community Amenities Fund. It showed over $100,000 collected that year alone. I scrambled to find the current budget, which Karen had so proudly included in her latest newsletter. The line item was still there. The fund was now listed under a vague heading, Capital Improvement and Contingency, but based on the numbers, they were still collecting that special assessment from every single one of the 200 homes in our development. $200 a quarter, per home. That was $80,000 a year. For what? For a pool and a clubhouse that were nothing but a ghost, a promise made on a developer's sales brochure a decade ago and never fulfilled. This was it. This was the big rule she was breaking. It wasn't just a rule, it was fraud. Decades of it. They were billing us for amenities that never existed. I ran downstairs, my mind racing. I pulled out the thick binder of HOA covenants I had received when I bought the house. I tore through the pages until I found the section on assessments. It clearly stated that special assessments must be tied to specific, approved capital projects. The fund could not simply be rolled into a general slush fund. Karen's stonewalling of my document request suddenly made perfect sense. She wasn't just hiding her petty vendetta against me, she was hiding a massive financial scandal. Whether she started it or just inherited it, she was now presiding over it. She was collecting the money. Her power, her meticulously crafted newsletters, her army of clipboard-wielding sycophants, it was all built on a foundation of lies. My strategy shifted in that instant. This was no longer about defending myself against a $500 fine. This was about taking down the whole rotten structure. I went from defense to offense. I immediately called Mr. Davies. "I found it," I said, my voice electric with the discovery. "I found the leverage. It's bigger than we ever imagined." I explained about the letters, the ghost amenities, the special assessment. There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. "Mr. Johnson," Mr. Davies finally said, his voice imbued with a new seriousness. "I believe you have just found the key. Don't say a word of this to anyone. Not a soul. Scan every single one of those documents and email them to me immediately. The annual HOA meeting is next month, is it not?" "Yes, it is." "Good," he said, a hint of steel in his tone. "Then that is where we will spring the trap. We're going to let her walk right into it in front of the entire community." The next few weeks were a blur of preparation. Karen, as expected, sent me a letter denying my request for documents, claiming it was overly broad and burdensome. Mr. Davies fired back with a letter from his own office, threatening a lawsuit to compel their release, citing the evidence from Mr. Peterson's letters as probable cause for financial mismanagement. That got their attention. A thick package of financial statements and meeting minutes arrived at my lawyer's office a week later. Together, we went through them line by line. It was a tangled mess, but the pattern was clear. The Community Amenities Fund had been renamed 3 times over the years, but it was always there. Money went in, but it never seemed to come out for any actual capital improvements. Instead, there were huge, unexplained expenses. Landscaping fees paid to a company that, a quick search revealed, was registered to Karen's brother-in-law. Exorbitant legal consulting fees. Administrative services that cost more than the entire snow removal budget for a decade. It was a slush fund, and it was being actively looted. We prepared our attack. Mr. Davies coached me on what to say. We made copies of the most damning evidence, Mr. Peterson's letters, the budget comparison showing the name changes of the fund, and the invoices from the questionable vendors. We also reached out to a few neighbors I knew I could trust. One of them was Arthur Hemmings, a retired accountant who had lived in Northwood for 40 years. He was quiet but sharp as a tack. When I showed him the evidence, his face went grim. "I always wondered about that assessment," he murmured, adjusting his glasses. It started right after the developer handed the HOA over to the residents. They made a big presentation about a pool and tennis courts. Then, nothing. People just got used to paying it, I suppose. He looked at me. "She's not just a bully, son. She's a thief." Arthur agreed to help. He would second my motion from the floor and use his accounting background to explain the financial discrepancies in layman's terms. Our small conspiracy was growing. The night of the annual meeting arrived. It was held in the drab, linoleum-floored event room of the local library. Usually, these meetings were sparsely attended, with maybe 20 people showing up out of 200 homes. But word had gotten around that something was going to happen. The simmering resentment over Karen's reign of terror had finally reached a boiling point. The room was packed. Over 100 people were there, a standing room-only crowd of angry and curious homeowners. Karen and her board sat at a long table at the front of the room, looking smug and self-satisfied. She clearly interpreted the large turnout as a testament to her effective leadership. She beamed at the crowd, called the meeting to order, and launched into her presidential report. It was a long, rambling speech about her accomplishments, the new, standardized mailboxes, the strict enforcement of lawn height, the improved aesthetic integrity of the community. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Then came the treasurer's report, delivered by her crony. He droned on about balanced budgets and fiscal responsibility. He presented a slideshow with colorful pie charts. One of the charts had a large slice labeled Capital Contingency Fund. He explained it was a healthy fund, ensuring the community's financial stability for years to come. When he finished, Karen asked if there were any questions from the floor. This was our moment. I stood up. My heart was pounding, but my voice was steady. "I have a question," I said, my voice carrying across the silent room. Every eye turned to me. Karen's smile tightened. "Mr. Johnson," she said, her tone condescending. "I trust this isn't about your outstanding fines." "No, it's not," I replied, holding up a folder. "It's about the Capital Contingency Fund. Can you tell us what specific capital projects that fund is designated for?" The treasurer stammered. "Well, it's for, contingencies. Future projects. Major repairs like a swimming pool, for instance." I asked. "Or tennis courts? Or a clubhouse?" A murmur went through the crowd. Karen's face went pale. "Those projects were deemed unfeasible years ago," she said sharply. "Then why?" I continued, my voice rising. "Is every single homeowner in this room still paying a $200 quarterly special assessment that was originally implemented for the sole purpose of building those amenities?" The room erupted. People started talking all at once. Karen banged her gavel. Order? Order? Mr. Johnson, you are out of line. Am I? I said, walking to the front of the room. I laid one of Mr. Peterson's letters on the projector so everyone could see. This is a letter from 8 years ago, asking the same question. And here, I slapped down the budget from that year, is the HOA Community Amenities Fund, and here, I slapped down the current budget, is the same fund, with a new name. You've been collecting $80,000 a year for over a decade for nothing. That is almost $1 million. So my question is, Karen, where is the money? Her face was a mottled mess of red and white. She was sputtering, speechless. Arthur Hemmings stood up. I can answer that, he said in his calm, authoritative voice. A portion of it appears to have been paid to a landscaping company owned by the president's brother-in-law, for services priced at 3 times the market rate. Another significant portion has gone to consulting fees for a firm that doesn't seem to exist. The collapse of her authority was swift and total. Her supporters on the board looked at her in horror, slowly pushing their chairs away from her as if she were contagious. The crowd was on its feet, shouting questions, demanding answers. Karen grabbed her purse and her gavel and tried to flee, but a group of angry homeowners blocked the door. She just stood there, trapped and exposed, her reign of petty tyranny dissolving under the harsh fluorescent lights of the library meeting room. Someone had already called the police. A uniformed officer arrived, followed by a detective. The meeting was officially adjourned and became an impromptu crime scene. Statements were taken. Our evidence was collected. Karen was escorted out, not as the president, but as a potential criminal. She refused to look at me, her face a mask of pure, undiluted hatred. The aftermath was messy but cathartic. The district attorney's office launched a full investigation. It turned out the fraud was even worse than we thought. Karen and a few members of the previous board had been systematically embezzling the funds for years. They had set up shell companies, written phony invoices, and used the HOA's accounts as their personal piggy bank. My snow-clearing finds were revealed for what they were, a vindictive attempt to punish and silence someone who she feared might start asking questions. Karen Miller was charged with multiple counts of felony embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy. Her brother-in-law and 2 former board members were also indicted. The trial was a local spectacle. Mr. Davies had me testify, and I simply told the truth, backed by the evidence in the old footlocker. She was found guilty on all counts. The judge was not lenient. Citing the egregious breach of trust against her own neighbors, he sentenced her to 5 years in state prison and ordered her to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in restitution. The HOA placed a lien on her house, which was eventually seized and sold to help repay the stolen funds. With the old board disgraced and removed, the community had to rebuild. We held a special election. Arthur Hemmings was unanimously elected as the new president. I was asked to serve on the board, but I politely declined. I had never wanted to be a leader, I just wanted to be a good neighbor. I had done my part. The new board, with Arthur at the helm, was a model of transparency. They hired a forensic accountant to sort out the mess, and they sued the old board members to recover as much of the stolen money as possible. All the fines against me were, of course, immediately dropped and expunged from the records. The first act of the new board was to repeal dozens of Karen's most ridiculous rules. The neighborhood started to breathe again. People started planting flowers that weren't on the approved list. Kids left their bikes on the lawn. The oppressive atmosphere of constant surveillance and judgment vanished, replaced by the quiet, cooperative spirit I remembered from my childhood. A few years have passed since then. Northwood Estates is a better place to live than it has been in a long time. The HOA is still there, but it does what it's supposed to. It maintains the common areas and throws a great block party. The annual fees were cut nearly in half once the fraudulent expenses were eliminated. We never did build the pool, but with some of the recovered money, we built a beautiful new playground in the green space at the entrance, with a small picnic pavilion. It gets more use than a pool ever would have. I saw Karen once after she was released from prison. I was loading equipment onto my trailer when a car I didn't recognize pulled up. She got out of the passenger side. She looked older, smaller. The fire was gone from her eyes, replaced by a weary sort of emptiness. She walked over to me, and for a second, I tensed up, expecting another confrontation. "Mr. Johnson," she said, her voice quiet, almost a whisper. I just wanted to say that I'm sorry." I looked at her, this woman who had tried to ruin my life over a pile of snow. I didn't feel anger anymore. I just felt a sort of detached pity. "I appreciate that," I said, and that was all. There was nothing else to say. She nodded, got back in the car, and it drove away. I never saw her again. Sometimes, when a big snowstorm is forecast, I think about that winter. I think about how a simple act of neighborly kindness could be twisted into a violation, and how that twisted logic became the thread that unraveled a whole tapestry of deceit. It taught me that bullies, no matter how much power they seem to have, are often just hiding their own deep-seated corruption and fear. Their strength is an illusion, built on a framework of rules they themselves don't follow. All it takes is one person, pushed too far, to start checking the foundation. My business is doing great. I still have the best-looking lawn on the block, not because of any rule, but because I take pride in my work. And every time it snows, I fire up my plow. I clear my driveway, and then I go do Mrs. Gable's. I do it because she needs help, and because I can. I do it because that's what good neighbors do. And in Northwood Estates, no one hands out fines for that anymore. We are a community again, and that is a victory far more satisfying than any courtroom judgment.